The morning of July 19, 1941, broke cold and gray over the English Channel. A thick blanket of clouds hung at 8,000 feet, the kind of weather that made fighter pilots nervous. You couldn't see what was coming until it was already on top of you. Oberleutnant Franz Stigler sat in the cramped cockpit of his Messerschmitt Bf 109F4, part of Jagerschwader 27 stationed at Calais-Marc in occupied France. At 23 years old, he was already a seasoned veteran with 12 confirmed kills painted beneath his canopy, small black crosses that told the story of 12 men who hadn't made it home. The engine of his 109 rumbled with that distinct mechanical growl, the Daimler-Benz DB601E producing 1,350 horsepower of raw German engineering. It was a beautiful machine, sleek and deadly, painted in the standard splinter camouflage of dark green and gray that broke up its silhouette against the clouds. The mission briefing had been simple: escort a formation of Dornier bombers targeting the Royal Navy dockyards at Chatham. Intelligence suggested light resistance. The RAF had been bloodied badly during the Battle of Britain the previous summer, and while they were still fighting, they were stretched thin. Or so the briefing officer had said. Stigler didn't trust intelligence reports. He trusted his eyes, his instincts, and the 600 rounds per minute cyclic rate of the twin MG 151 cannons mounted in his wings. He glanced to his left. His wingman, Feldwebel Kurt Meyer, flew in perfect formation, close enough that Stigler could see the leather patches on his flight gloves. Meyer was 19, fresh-faced, and still believed in glory. Stigler had stopped believing in glory around his 8th kill. Now he just believed in getting home. Achtung, bandits! Spitfires, 3 o'clock high. The radio crackled with the urgent voice of the bomber formation leader. Stigler's head snapped right, eyes scanning the gray soup above. Then he saw them, dark silhouettes dropping through the cloud layer like hawks diving on pigeons. 4, maybe 5 Supermarine Spitfires, their elliptical wings unmistakable even at distance. They were RAF No. 74 Squadron, the Tigers, and they were coming in fast. "Brake right! Brake right!" Stigler shouted into his throat mic, slamming his stick to the side. The Messerschmitt rolled hard, G-forces crushing him into his seat. The world tilted violently. Sky became earth, earth became sky. He caught a glimpse of tracer fire stitching through the space where he'd been 2 seconds earlier, glowing orange lines that looked almost beautiful until you remembered each one could tear through aluminum and flesh with equal ease. The Dogfight exploded across the sky in seconds. Aircraft twisted and rolled in a three-dimensional chess game played at 300 miles per hour. Stigler pulled his 109 into a tight climbing turn, feeling the airframe shudder as he pushed it to the edge of a stall. A Spitfire flashed past his nose, close enough that he could see the pilot's white scarf whipping in the slipstream. He kicked the rudder, lined up the shot, and squeezed the trigger. The cannons roared, the entire aircraft vibrating with recoil. Pieces flew off the Spitfire's tail, fabric and metal fragmenting into the slipstream, but it kept flying, rolling away into a dive. Then everything went to hell. The impact came without warning. A massive bang that sounded like someone had hit his aircraft with a sledgehammer. The entire Messerschmitt lurched sideways, throwing Stigler against his harness. Warning lights blazed across his instrument panel like a Christmas tree. Engine temperature spiking. Oil pressure dropping. Coolant temperature redlining. He looked left through the canopy and felt his stomach drop. Half of his engine cowling was gone. Simply gone. Where there should have been smooth metal panels covering the Daimler-Benz engine, there was just a ragged hole with mechanical guts spilling out. Pistons pumping. Connecting rods spinning. Flames licking at exposed fuel lines. A 20 mm cannon shell from one of the Spitfires had punched through the engine compartment and detonated, ripping away the cowling and damaging God knew what underneath. The engine was still running. Somehow, impossibly, it was still running. But it was running wrong. The smooth growl had become a violent, chattering scream. Black smoke poured from the exposed cylinders, streaming back over the canopy and obscuring his vision. The aircraft shook like a paint mixer. "Stigler, you're trailing smoke. Get out of there." Meyer's voice, high with panic. Stigler's hands moved on instinct, throttling back to reduce the strain on the dying engine. The Messerschmitt was still flying, but for how long? He was 25 miles from the French coast, over enemy territory, with half his engine missing and every RAF pilot in Kent probably lining up to finish the job. He had to make a choice. Bail out and spend the rest of the war in a British POW camp, or try to nurse this wounded bird home across the channel. The engine coughed. A cylinder misfired, sending a shudder through the airframe. Oil streaked back across his windscreen, dark and thick. Franz Stigler pushed the stick forward and dove for the deck, praying to a god he wasn't sure he believed in anymore. The real fight was just beginning. The Messerschmitt dropped like a stone through 3,000 feet in less than a minute. Stigler's hands gripped the control stick so tightly his knuckles went white, every vibration from the dying engine transmitting directly through the airframe into his body. The altimeter needle unwound rapidly. 2,500 feet, 2,000 feet, 1,500 feet. At 500 feet above the green patchwork of Kent farmland, he pulled back on the stick and leveled off, the G-forces pushing him deep into his seat. Low altitude was his only hope now. Down here, in the weeds, he might avoid being spotted by patrolling RAF fighters. The English countryside rushed past beneath him in a blur. Hedgerows, stone walls, a farmhouse with laundry hanging in the yard, a woman who looked up and pointed as the smoking German fighter screamed overhead at 280 miles per hour. The engine was dying. He could feel it. Every few seconds, one of the 6 cylinders would misfire completely, sending a violent shudder through the airframe that rattled his teeth. The temperature gauge had gone beyond the red line into territory the engineers had probably never tested. Smoke continued to pour from the exposed engine compartment, not the clean blue smoke of burning oil, but the thick, black, greasy smoke that meant something fundamental was wrong. "Come on, you beautiful bastard," Stigler muttered through clenched teeth. "Just get me to the channel. Just 10 more miles." His radio crackled. Any aircraft, this is Tangmere Tower. Multiple bogies heading south-southeast over Ashford, altitude 500 feet. All available units, intercept and engage. They'd spotted him. Of course they'd spotted him. A German fighter trailing a smoke plume visible for miles, flying at rooftop level across southern England? He might as well have been firing flares. He glanced at his fuel gauge. 3/4 full. Under normal circumstances, plenty to make it back to Calais. But these weren't normal circumstances. Every second he kept the throttle open. Even at reduced power, he was cooking the engine further. The question wasn't whether it would fail. The question was whether it would fail over land or water. The coastline appeared ahead, a thin gray line separating green land from gray-blue sea. Dover. The white cliffs rose up on his right, that famous chalk face that had watched over the channel for thousands of years. On any other day, it would have been beautiful. Today, it was just another landmark between him and home. The engine exploded. Not a dramatic Hollywood fireball. Nothing ever was in real life, but a sharp, violent crack followed by a shower of metal fragments. One of the pistons had finally given up, punching through the cylinder head and sending shrapnel through what remained of the cowling. The propeller, suddenly unbalanced, began to windmill erratically. The vibration became so violent that Stigler's vision blurred, his instruments becoming unreadable dancing needles. He was over the channel now. Gray water stretched out beneath him, white caps marking where the wind drove waves against the current. 22 miles to France. 22 miles with an engine that was more smoke and noise than thrust. "Mayday, mayday," he transmitted, knowing the Germans monitored RAF frequencies just as the British monitored theirs. "BF 109, November Charlie 7, engine failure over channel. attempting to make French coast. No response. Maybe they heard him, maybe they didn't. Maybe his radio had been damaged too. The engine quit. Not gradually. Not with warning. 1 second it was running, badly, but running. The next second, silence. The propeller stopped windmilling and locked in place, a useless three-bladed sculpture that now created drag instead of thrust. The sudden quiet was deafening after 20 minutes of mechanical screaming. Stigler was now flying a 13,000-pound glider at 400 feet above the English Channel. In aviation, they called this a very bad situation. He went through the restart procedure automatically, fingers dancing over switches and controls. Boost pump on. Magnetos to both. Throttle forward. Nothing. The engine was dead, its internal components probably fused into an expensive lump of scrap metal. The Messerschmitt was descending. Without engine power, every second of forward flight was traded for altitude. His glide ratio was maybe 10 to 1 on a good day, and this was not a good day. Simple mathematics. 400 feet of altitude meant he could glide maybe 4,000 feet, less than a mile, before he hit the water. The French coast was still 15 miles away. "Well," Stigler said aloud to his silent cockpit, "that's that, then." He went through the ditching checklist from memory. Shoulder straps tight. Check. Radio off to prevent electrical fire. Check. Canopy jettison handle ready. Check. He reached down and unlaced his flight boots, pulling them off and tossing them into the footwell. Boots filled with water would drag you down. Every German pilot knew that. Every German pilot had heard stories of men who'd survived the crash but drowned because they couldn't swim in their boots. At 200 feet, he could see individual waves. The channel was rougher than it had looked from altitude. Gray-green water churned into white foam by the morning wind. Ditching a Messerschmitt was survivable, technically, but the survival rate was less than 50%. The 109 was nose-heavy, built for speed and agility, not water landings. Hit the waves wrong and the nose would dig in, flipping the aircraft over in a cartwheel that would break your neck. 100 feet. He trimmed the aircraft nose up, trying to scrub off as much speed as possible. 85 miles per hour. Still too fast, but it would have to do. The water rushed up to meet him, and in that final moment, Franz Stigler did something he rarely did anymore. He prayed. The impact was like hitting concrete. The Messerschmitt hit the channel at 82 miles per hour. The impact wasn't like hitting concrete, it was hitting concrete. The airframe screamed as aluminum crumpled. Stigler's head snapped forward against the gun sight despite his locked harness, splitting his forehead open. Blood poured into his eyes. The world became a chaotic blur of gray water, white foam, and the shriek of tearing metal. The nose plowed into a wave and the aircraft flipped forward, tail over nose, in a violent cartwheel. Water exploded through the shattered canopy. Ice-cold English Channel, 52 degrees Fahrenheit, hit Stigler like a physical blow, driving the air from his lungs. The Messerschmitt rolled inverted, sinking immediately, the weight of that dead engine dragging it toward the bottom of the channel. Stigler's training took over. Lungs burning, vision darkening at the edges, he found the canopy release with numb fingers and pulled. Nothing happened. The mechanism was jammed, twisted by the impact. He pulled again, harder. Still nothing. The cockpit was filling with water, green-gray and murky, rising past his chest, his shoulders, his chin. "This is how I die," he thought with strange clarity. Trapped in a coffin 20 feet under the channel. Then the canopy broke free, not from the release mechanism, but because the entire rail assembly tore away from the twisted fuselage. It tumbled away into the murk, trailing air bubbles, and suddenly Stigler was free. He kicked away from the sinking aircraft, lungs screaming for air, and clawed toward the light. He broke the surface gasping, choking, spitting seawater. Waves slapped his face. The Messerschmitt was gone, already 40 feet down and sinking fast, taking with it his flight jacket, his boots, his survival kit. All he had left was his life vest. Thank God for the life vest, inflated and keeping him barely afloat in the rolling seas. The cold hit him then. Not gradually, but all at once, like someone had injected ice water directly into his veins. 52 degrees doesn't sound that cold on land. In water, it's a death sentence. Hypothermia would set in within 30 minutes. After that, his muscles would stop working. After that, his heart would stop. The Channel had killed more pilots than enemy fire ever had. Stigler forced himself to think through the fog of cold and shock. He was 15 miles from the French coast, probably 10 miles from the English coast. Too far to swim either direction, even if he weren't freezing to death. His only hope was rescue. But by whom? The Germans didn't control the Channel. The British did. If a Royal Navy patrol boat found him, best-case scenario was a POW camp. Worst case, well, there were stories of downed German pilots being machine-gunned in the water by vengeful British sailors. War made men do terrible things. Stigler. Stigler. The voice cut through the wind and waves. Stigler twisted in the water, vision blurring, and saw it, a dark shape against the gray sky, low over the water. At first his hypothermia-addled brain thought it was another Messerschmitt, and his heart leapt. Then his vision cleared and he saw the truth. It was a Supermarine Spitfire. The same aircraft type that had shot him down. The same aircraft type he'd been trying to kill 30 minutes ago. It circled once, low and slow, and Stigler could see the pilot's helmeted head turned toward him, looking down at the German flyer struggling in the waves. He's lining up for a strafing run, Stigler thought. He's going to finish the job. The Spitfire leveled out. Stigler could see the black dots of the wing-mounted machine guns pointing directly at him. This was it. After everything, after 53 combat missions, after 12 kills, after surviving flak and fuel fires and engine failures, he was going to die here, shot like a dog in the water by a British pilot whose name he'd never know. The Spitfire roared overhead at 200 feet, so close that Stigler could feel the prop wash rippling the water. But no bullets came. No tracers. Nothing. The British pilot waggled his wings, the universal pilot signal for "I see you," and climbed away to the east. Stigler floated there, stunned, shaking from cold and shock and something that might have been gratitude. The British pilot had spared him. Why? Honor? Mercy? Or maybe just the recognition that they were all caught in the same meat grinder, and sometimes killing wasn't necessary? He'd never know. 10 minutes later, though it felt like hours, Stigler heard engines again. Different engines. Heavier. He turned his head, barely able to move anymore, and saw the gray shape of a Kriegsmarine rescue launch racing toward him, white bow wave curling on either side. German sailors lined the rail, pointing, shouting. A line splashed into the water next to him. Strong hands grabbed his arms. He was hauled from the channel like a drowned rat, deposited on the deck of the launch in a puddle of seawater and vomit. Someone wrapped a wool blanket around his shoulders. Someone else forced hot coffee into his shaking hands. "You're one lucky bastard, Oberleutnant," the launch commander said, kneeling beside him. "We heard your mayday. What the hell happened up there?" Stigler looked up at him, teeth chattering so hard he could barely speak. "Took a hit, lost half the engine, flew it anyway." The commander whistled low. "Half the engine? Jesus Christ! How far did you make it?" 15 miles from England, Stigler managed. "Across the channel. On half an engine." The sailors exchanged looks. This would be a story they'd tell for years, in bars and mess halls, the story of the crazy pilot who flew a Messerschmitt with half its engine gone. But Stigler was thinking about something else. He was thinking about the British pilot who'd had him in his sights and chosen mercy over vengeance. He was thinking about how thin the line was between life and death, between enemy and human being. He was thinking about 12 black crosses painted on his fuselage, 12 men who hadn't been as lucky as he was today. War would go on. But today, in the middle of the English Channel, two pilots had recognized something in each other that transcended the uniform. That was worth more than any kill count. The hospital at Calais Mark smelled of disinfectant and cigarette smoke. Franz Stigler lay in a narrow bed, wrapped in so many blankets that he could barely move, waiting for his core temperature to climb back above 95 degrees. The base doctor, an older man with kind eyes and hands that shook slightly from too much coffee, had told him he'd been 30 minutes from death when the rescue launch pulled him out. 30 minutes. That's how close it had been. Feldwebel Meyer visited him that evening, still in his flight suit, smelling of aviation fuel and sweat. "You're famous," he said, dropping into a chair beside the bed. "Everyone's talking about it. The Messerschmitt that flew on half an engine. They're calling you Eisenvogel, Iron Bird." Stigler tried to smile, but his face was too stiff from cold damage. "How many did we lose?" Meyer's expression darkened. 2 Dorniers. One more 109. Hoffman and Schmidt didn't make it back. 22 years old and 19 years old. Both younger than Stigler. Both dead now, somewhere in the Channel or scattered across a Kent farmland. The black crosses on their aircraft would never be painted. Their names would be added to the casualty lists, telegrams would be sent to mothers and wives, and the war would grind on without them. "The British pilot," Stigler said suddenly. "The Spitfire that circled me. Did anyone see what happened to him?" Meyer shook his head. "Why do you care? He's the one who shot you down. He's also the one who didn't shoot me in the water when he had the chance." Stigler looked at the ceiling, at the water-stained tiles and flickering fluorescent light. "I want to know his name." "That's crazy, Franz. He's the enemy. So am I. To him. But he let me live." The conversation stayed with Stigler through his recovery, through the 3 days of bed rest and the week of desk duty while they cleared him for flight status. It stayed with him through the remainder of 1941, through the bitter Russian winter that killed more German soldiers than any battle, through 1942 and the turning tide in North Africa, through 1943 and the realization that Germany was losing this war. The maintenance crew at Calais Mark recovered pieces of his Messerschmitt from the Channel floor a month after the incident. What they found astonished them. The entire left side of the engine block was gone, simply gone, blown away by the 20mm shell. The number 2 and number 4 cylinders were missing completely. The number 1 cylinder head was cracked. The supercharger was hanging by a single bolt. The oil pump was shattered. By all laws of physics and engineering, that engine should have seized within seconds of being hit. But it hadn't. It had run for another 15 minutes, carrying Franz Stigler 15 miles across the English Channel on 3 good cylinders and sheer mechanical stubbornness. The senior mechanic, a grizzled veteran who'd been working on aircraft since the Great War, just shook his head in wonder. "I've never seen anything like it," he said. "This engine shouldn't have run at all. But it saved your life." They mounted pieces of the destroyed cowling in the squadron ready room, a testament to either skill or luck or divine intervention. No one could quite agree which. Pilots would touch it for luck before missions. It became a ritual, a superstition, a piece of twisted metal that represented survival against impossible odds. The war ended in May 1945. Franz Stigler survived, one of the lucky ones, though lucky was a relative term when talking about men who'd spent 4 years killing and nearly being killed. He'd ended with 28 confirmed victories and a chest full of medals that felt heavier than they should. He'd seen friends die, enemies die, and civilians caught in the crossfire die. He'd seen cities burn and children starve and the worst things that humans could do to each other when ideology and nationalism removed their inhibitions. He emigrated to Canada in 1953, trying to outrun the memories. He worked as a commercial pilot, flying cargo planes across the Northern Territories, far from combat and crowds. He married. He had children. He tried to forget. But he never forgot the Spitfire pilot. In 1986, 45 years after that morning over the Channel, Stigler attended a fighter pilots' reunion in Vancouver. He was 68 years old now, gray-haired and slow-moving, but his eyes were still sharp. He was sitting at the hotel bar, nursing a whiskey, when he overheard a conversation at the next table. "And I nearly shot the poor bastard in the water, but I just couldn't do it, you know? He was floating there, no threat to anyone, and I thought, what's the point? So I waggled my wings and let him be." Stigler turned slowly. The speaker was an elderly British man, thin and dignified, with the bearing of a former military officer. Their eyes met. Something unspoken passed between them. Recognition, maybe, or just the shared understanding of men who'd seen the same horrors from opposite sides. "What's your name?" Stigler asked. "Group Captain Charles Brown, RAF, retired." "And you?" "Franz Stigler, Luftwaffe, also retired." They stared at each other for a long moment. Then Brown's eyes widened. "July 41? Channel crossing? Messerschmitt with half its bloody engine missing." Stigler nodded slowly. "Good God," Brown whispered. "You're the Iron Bird. I never thought. I've wondered for 45 years if you made it." They talked until 3 in the morning, two old men sharing memories of a war that had tried to make them kill each other. Brown had been the pilot in the Spitfire that day, part of No. 74 Squadron, the Tigers. He'd hit Stigler's engine with a deflection shot at 300 yards. "Best shot I ever made," he said ruefully, and then watched in amazement as the Messerschmitt kept flying. "I followed you for 5 minutes," Brown said. "I watched you flying that broken bird toward France, and I thought, if that man can fly on half an engine, he deserves to make it home. So when you went down, and I came back to check for survivors, and I saw you there in the water, I just couldn't. You'd earned your life." Stigler reached across the table and gripped Brown's hand. No words were necessary. In that moment, they weren't German and British, weren't enemies separated by history and flags and ideology. They were just two old pilots who'd survived, who'd found mercy in the middle of mercilessness, who'd proven that even in war, humanity could still exist. Franz Stigler died in 2008 at the age of 92. Charles Brown died 6 months later at 87. They'd stayed friends until the end, corresponding regularly, visiting each other's families, sharing the bond of men who'd seen both the worst and the best of each other. The pieces of Stigler's Messerschmitt engine, the impossible engine that ran on 3 cylinders for 15 miles, are now displayed at the Canadian Warplane Heritage Museum in Hamilton, Ontario. The placard beside the exhibit tells the story of a German pilot who refused to die, of an engine that defied physics, of a British pilot who chose mercy, and of 2 enemies who became brothers. War has a way of grinding men down into statistics, into kill counts and casualty reports and strategic objectives. But sometimes, very rarely, war also reveals something transcendent about the human spirit, the capacity for courage, for mercy, for recognizing our shared humanity even when everything around us insists we're different. Franz Stigler flew 15 miles across the English Channel on half an engine, but that wasn't the most remarkable part of the story. The most remarkable part was what happened after. The mercy shown, the friendship forged, the proof that even in humanity's darkest hours, we can still choose to see each other not as enemies, but as men. The engine that refused to die became a symbol of that choice. It sits in its museum case now, twisted and scarred and broken, but still somehow beautiful. Still somehow proof that impossible things can happen when human will meets mechanical determination. Still proof that even in war, hope can survive. And sometimes, that's enough.